let's talk about condition hazards. So how am I going to do this? I'm going to just
so I will share the screen. Yeah, you ready?
Great. Yes. Okay. Here we are. All right. So the first thing is we have a system and we use a lot of Google Sheets because it's quite helpful. And we have.
You able to make that any bigger?
I am. Do you see that? How's that?
Double that size would be better.
Oh, that's going to be big.
Oh yeah, that's better. Go back up to the top and now we can, right. Sort of read it now.
So just to explain roughly what we have here is this is a list of 3,219 condition hazards. What happens is we go through the property and the evidence that we've got, and we have a rating system. So it goes from really serious. So if it's a category 5, that means it's a really serious problem, down to 1, which is just take some note. And category 5 is absolute category 1 hazard under HHSRS guidance. And then category 3 is category 2 hazard. So category 1 is an issue that has immediate that could immediately affect health, safety, or mental well-being of the occupant, whereas category 2 is one that could at some point. So that's roughly how that fits together. Let's have a look at this property. So typical condition issues. I'll just bring this up here. Good old Imgur. And here is a classic. So here we've got rising damp, and we've got a few things wrong with all of this. So the first thing, we often get rather smudgy pictures, but it is what it is. There are 2 issues here to consider. One is the electrics. So you've got rising damp up here. And I think what's happened here is that they tried to fix the damp issue in the past, which is why you don't see any down here. But it's so bad that it's gone more than a meter high. Anyhow, the rule of thumb here is, would this affect the health, safety, or the mental well-being of the occupant? The answer is yes. You can't live in a damp property. The second thing is we've got these electrics, and let's assume that they are in a damp environment, and water and electricity, bad combination. So already I've got 2 serious condition issues here. And here's another one. So what have we got here? This is a really bad house.
Is it the same house?
Yeah, it is. It is. So all of these pictures are the same property. And here again, we've got 3 issues that I can see offhand. Obviously, chronic damp, dangerous electrics because of all the water, the moisture around the place, and rotting skirting boards. And those rotting skirting boards are obviously going to have mold and fungus, and then you're into toxic mold, which is going to mess up your lungs. So a really bad place. Let's see what else. Let's see what other goodness there is in this house. Right. So you probably can't see that, but just plastic cracks and lots of damp. And I think I'm just going through this. So here's an example of. And the reason, by the way, we use Imgur is that we have a templating system, and what it does is we have this massive template, and we pull all the condition issues into the template, and then we manually tidy up the template, add in the case arguments, do all of the admin work. But this just saves a bit of effort and time, which is a good thing. Now, loose slates and so we now have loose slates. So obviously the issue with loose slates are if they fall, if they fall on you, you're going to potentially suffer a catastrophic injury. And there was something here. I'll just close this up because we're getting too many tabs. There was a nice one of a roof. And here it is. So here's a good example of something I see quite frequently, which is...
Clarify, because obviously it's not as big as perhaps you can see. Is that a hole in the roof?
Yes.
Like, oh, there, brilliant.
It's really smudgy, but it's not a great image, but that's often what we have to deal with. You've got the roof, you've got the rafters, or the roof beam. I don't know what it's called. There's a word, the technical word.
Truss, isn't it?
Trusses.
Like yeah.
Yes. And on these, so this is a picture looking up to the ridge of the roof, and we can see here that there's actually water damage here. So yes, there's a hole in the roof. There's a hole in the underlay, or the felt lining, and the water's got in, and yeah, there are all sorts of issues here. So that there's a theme, which is things that could hurt your health or cause injury. So I'm just going to click through some more pictures, and these are smaller condition issues, but they all add up. So this one here, for example, there we go. All right, this just cracks. Now, in itself, that's not particularly serious, but when we do the when we consider condition hazards, we treat it a bit like point scoring. So here's a calculator. I'm going to just open all this up, and essentially you would have, say, a point target. So a typical.
Is this something we have access to, or is
yeah? It's on the stamp duty website, so you can just stampdutyadvicebureau.co.uk, and then the calculator is here. And what, just because it's all zoomed in, it's the formatting's a bit off. But anyway, here's the sort of thing here. So this is probably like 5 points. It's not a significant issue, but you add up the cracks here, you call that 10 points because it's reasonably serious.
Can I just clarify again? Is this, per room that we're looking at this, or is it per property? Because presumably you wouldn't necessarily just have one.
It's per property. So in other words, if take for example a property and it's got that damp issue. Let's go back to that. Imagine you've got one room in the property, and this one here will do. You've got one room and you have this problem in it. Then you can argue that the whole building is not habitable because it's integral to the building.
So for instance, with that in mind and with the damp, so for instance, with this property that I'm purchasing, it's got a small extension at the back.
Yep.
And I put a screwdriver into the floor, and it's literally like a soup. It was like, it's so damp, and it was quite extraordinary, quite shocking. So that, even though that's probably only, I don't know, 2.5, 3 square meters,
yes, that
is part of the building. So therefore would be a tick in one of those boxes.
Exactly. It's a bit like the analogy would be mixed use. So for example, if you're buying a shop with uppers, let's say 30% of the floor area is shop, and 70% is residential. The whole lot is assessed as non-residential for stamp duty purposes because it's mixed. And so you can argue a similar principle here, which is that even though 2 square meters of the property is in this condition, the fact is the whole property is not habitable, which is a reasonable thing to do because you should have enjoyment of the whole property if that's where you live. Versus, well, there's damp in that room, I'm just going to shutter off that room and enjoy the rest of the house. It doesn't really work like that. So yes, if it's in one patch, it's relevant. So let's just have a look at some others here. And bathroom, classic. So the issue here, of course, and if you notice, we're relying heavily on surveys, and these are really helpful because a surveyor is a third-party professional that works independently. Obviously, you pay the the professional, but they're just going to objectively state the truth, as it were. And therefore, a survey is an incredibly valuable thing to have when arguing your case around property condition. Good photography is too. So
that was black mold.
Yes. So the surveyor says there's mold, and obviously black mold is a really serious matter. So here we are here, a bathroom, obviously, and you can see on the ceiling, there's mold. Now, in itself, that's not especially serious, you might argue, but the reality is that under HHSRS guidance, black mold is toxic. Black mold is a category 1 hazard. If there's a category 1 hazard, theoretically, the local authority could shut down the property and say, issue a prohibition notice and say you can't live there, or you can't live in part of the property or whatever. And then that arcs back to this whole point about the HMRC guidance on the matter.
So does it take just one category 1? Or
yes, so
you can either have a whole host of sort of smaller issues. So like you mentioned, a small crack might be 5 points, and you may have a whole host of other things which could in total reach the required level, or you could have just like one very serious category 1 hazard.
Yes, I think it's a bit like a person who presents with a heart condition, or congestive heart failure, or something horrible. That's just one issue of many. And so with a house with condition hazards, there will always be more than one issue. But you could say that if you have something like dangerous electrics, for example, a failed electric safety test, you've got a hazardous property, because obviously electricity can kill you if it goes through you instead of the device.
Serious issue, yeah.
So it could be, if you're thinking about your own property that you purchased in the last 4 years, that you paid higher rate stamp duty, and you're thinking, what were the big hazards back then? Well, there are these blockbuster hazards, which are going to be what we've seen: damp, mold, etc. Dangerous electrics is classic. But here's something a bit more subtle. So this one is, I'll just zoom in here a little bit. Right. Sorry, I'm just trying to, I don't know if you can see that. Okay. See if I can open this in a new tab. If I can zoom right. Okay, here we go. All right. What's special about this picture, Emma?
Oh, somebody's constantly calling me for a second. So I can see we've got a loose tile.
Yep. Where's that loose tile?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got yourself a loose tile at the front. So okay, I'll just explain the context of this. Right, you've got a loose tile. Fine. So what? Well, the issue is that if you were poking around in the front garden, chatting to your neighbor by the wall or whatever, and that thing came loose, that's a small guillotine. So that's quite an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, next. And the idea being that these issues, they accumulate. And here's another one. Moisture. And you can see here that I don't know if you can see here, but the reading is in the red, and there's quite a lot of moisture. You can actually see the damage on the wall. Yeah. Again, it's another issue. So when we have the calculator on the website, which you might want to play with, whatever, you can see that there are all of the CSS. Oh dear, I need to write. I don't know what's going on there. Okay. Anyway, the point being that you could say mold, damp, toxic mold, for example, 100 points. You've got yourself a case. So let's say 100 points is a case. Damp, if you've only got a small amount, how much would you score that? how much more of that damp would you need to really argue that this property isn't habitable? So in this case, not that much damp, but there is damp. So let's say there's more than this in the house. So I would give this 30 points, for example. So let's say we got 2 or 3 other points where there's damp. It's not turned into mold. It's just a kind of a lurking issue that people can kind of live around. But damp doesn't occur in one spot. It tends to be fairly pervasive. So therefore, you might argue that.
So generally, you would anticipate, wouldn't you, that damp, let's say it's in the basement or on the ground floor, it would generally be, probably if it's on one wall, it would be the whole side of that house, or even the whole of that basement, so to speak.
Yeah. And so do you remember earlier I said a good test is, could you have rented that property out? I think most investors are knowledgeable enough on condition to know what safe looks like, what reasonable, what habitable looks like. Now, here's another example of something. Boiler installed. In itself, that's not a big deal, but it's not enclosed, and arguably, if the thing went wrong, then you've got yourself a higher risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, we're not saying that that's an especially serious issue. We're just saying be aware of it, and that's reasonable because you should be.